everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Sales Development Podcast. I am David Dulany, your host, and I'm joined today by Diego Sternberg with Nexton. How you doing today, Diego?
I'm doing pretty well. Thank you for having me, David.
I'm super excited to dive in. I know that you're calling in all the way from Buenos Aires today.
Yeah, the winter is starting. It's funny, right? We're in different hemispheres and different seasons.
Oh my gosh. I know we're enjoying the spring here in San Francisco, and you're just leaving the fall now, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we're
Well,
getting ready for the ski season.
okay, well, I want to come and visit you. But first of all, Nexton, what are you working on there? And how did you get into this?
Now, yeah, great question. I was very fortunate to go to school um, in the US. I went to Stanford, where I did my master's in business. And after school, I decided to come back to Argentina. And one of the things you realize pretty quickly when you're back in Argentina looking for a job is that access to opportunities is very, very, very different in Latin America. So with a friend of mine, after working for a few years at different tech companies, different companies in general, we decided it was time to bridge the gap. There's really good talent. You were mentioning that you have experience working with talent from Latin America. There's fantastic talent, specifically fantastic engineers. So we thought about with my friend Agustin, we thought about the future of work and what the world might look like down the line. And this is like 2015, so a really long time ago. And we decided we had to, it's not that we could, we had to start connecting the great talent Latin America has to offer with companies in the US. So a lot of my friends at that time, the friends from business school, they were starting their own companies, and they were, of course, our initial clients. So we started with a few of my friends. We focus on delivering great value. When you build a company like this, a services company, you always need to focus on the quality of the service that you're offering, because you know that you're going to grow. Your main source of new clients is going to be referrals, right? So we delivered great value because, of course, it's the right thing to do. We helped a lot of companies build their own engineering teams in Latin America. We made a lot of people happy in Latin America by offering them access to all of this, top-notch opportunities where they can learn a lot. That's a maybe a different chapter, something we can talk about. And then we started asking our clients for referrals. Fast forward 8 years, the world changed completely in 2020, right? Remote work became mainstream. So 8 years ago, it was really hard to convince a company to hire talent remotely. Most people were operating from the office, but now everyone is remote, right? Or most companies are remote, so it makes total sense to think about building their teams overseas. And specifically, Latin America has a lot to offer. We were talking about the time zone. It's 3 p.m. here. It's a 4-hour difference with the Bay Area, 1 hour difference with the East Coast. So it's a very convenient way of building a company to have everyone in the same time zone.
Yes. Wow. Okay. So have you found that the evolution of work has been in your favor, in that people are much more used to working with companies like yours versus, like you mentioned just a few years ago before COVID?
Yeah, so before COVID, before 2020, we had to teach a lot of our clients how to work remotely and how to operate these engineering teams that we were building for them. And it's important to know that most of the teams we built, they are not in one physical location either, right? They're fairly distributed. So if you think about what the best way to access the best talent is, you don't want to restrict it in any way by location, right? So we build distributed teams for our clients. Oftentimes we had to teach them and give them the tools and processes and the mindset to be able to operate remotely, both to the clients and to the teams. Uh, in 2020, the world, took a big turn.
Mhm.
Uh, Unfortunately, I would say, but at least
Yeah.
the way in which we work changed. I think for the better, especially because it started offering a lot of opportunities to people who are not in the main tech hubs, right? So now you can work for the greatest tech company, even if you are living in the middle of the Amazon in Brazil, right? Think about
That's
think about
amazing.
the impact that that experience can have in the life of the engineer that is in the middle of the Amazon, right? The what that engineer is learning, the connection he or she has with the team, what the company is building, and at the end of the day, that person shuts down their laptop and they are back in the middle of the Amazon, and they can become, our vision is really that those will become the entrepreneurs of the future, and they will learn so much that then they will be able to locally build their own companies and hire more people. So, it's a big leap of faith, but I think this is how we are able to transform Latin America. And actually, if you look at what's happened in India, over the past 10 years. I think it has a lot to do with this, right? Now, the best engineers in India, they're actually working for Indian companies oftentimes.
Mhm.
Uh, so
Amazing.
this is hopefully the future.
And if you go back to initially, you started calling up your friends from business school and again, hey, here's an opportunity. It's probably a lower cost structure for them to work with your team. What was the initial reaction that you got? Was it like I'm a little nervous to put such an important job to this company, or did they kind of start very small with you and make sure that the quality was good? How did that work?
Yeah, no, great question. And you always start with the early adopters, right?
Hmm.
So the people that really they're not very risk averse and they're willing to try it no matter what, right? So those were the first clients. Fortunately, it all started with friends calling me to ask if I knew someone they could hire, right? So it was fairly easy. But then what happened, and this was, and it's actually still the case. Most companies and most think about not necessarily companies, but individuals, right? Executives at tech companies, think about a CTO or a head of engineering, they will have some sort of experience working with remote workforces, remote talent, but typically their experience is either hiring in India or hiring in Eastern Europe, because those two markets are way more developed than Latin America. Um, so from the beginning and even today, I find myself and the sales team finds themselves pitching Latin America, right? Why Latin America makes sense. And to me, it's so obvious that, but sometimes, of course, and this is a sales podcast, so this very clearly. The most obvious thing to you might not be obvious to the other person, right? So we have to very thoroughly explain why Latin America makes sense, the time zone, the culture affinity with the way of doing business in the US, the communication style, the problem solving skills. The fact that in Latin America there's always so much uncertainty that we need to learn how to deal with that, very similar to running a startup, right? Um, so there's a lot of that we have. So the main challenge has always been to pitch Latin America. Why Latin America, and not India or Eastern Europe?
That's amazing. So you're sort of the salesperson for an entire continent. And it's really hard because you think Latin America and there's hundreds of different cultures and languages and countries, and the average American, I mean, not to disparage our country, but they can only think of two or three big stereotypes,
Mm.
immediately in their head. When they think Latin America, it's whatever they they perceive that to be,
Mm.
which I'm sure that you hear about. And so how do you take them from maybe they don't know anything about Latin America, or they're skeptical, and you can bring them kind of over the hump to trust you and start to work with you.
Yeah. I think we're very lucky in that sense. So when we're talking to a company, they may come with all of their preconceptions about Latin America, but fortunately, we only need to talk them into giving it a try, and it's pretty straightforward. And sometimes that try means take a look at these three resumes. So embedded into our onboarding process, we run a process we call calibration, where we share some profiles with the client, and they give us feedback, right? So one of the reasons why we have that is because we want them to see the quality of talent they can find in Latin America, especially for those hiring managers or clients that don't have experience working with talent in Latin America. The ones that do have experience is easy, right? They know what they're getting into. They know what kind of quality of talent, quality of service they can find. Those that don't have the experience, we need to do a little more showing off, right? So we do it as part of the process, and then it's very evident, it's pretty straightforward. Every now and then we run into companies or specific decision makers at companies that would never, go outside their city. And actually, that happened pretty recently. And they said never. And if somebody from my team comes to me with this idea, I will make sure I fire them. But for the most part, most people, they are open to new ideas, especially in technology, right?
Yeah.
If you think about tech, it's a very dynamic industry, and that's what I love about tech, right? You can you can launch a new product from your garage in a weekend, uh, and everything changes really quickly. Think about AI, right? Like every week it's changing completely. So you need to be, in order to be in tech, you need to be open to change and different ideas and different approaches. And that's the kind of people we're typically working with. So for the most part, they're open um, to this new idea, giving it a try. And so it's pretty straightforward to start the conversation.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, is your salesperson who's pitching your company, are they based in the United States, or is it just one of your staff there in Buenos Aires?
Yeah, so as a company, we're fairly distributed ourselves, right? We never had an office. We're not planning on having an office. So we have our team all over Latin America. Some people are in Europe just because they decided to move to Europe for personal reasons. Um, so traditionally, our sales team has always been in Latin America. And I think it's something very natural for us because we're pitching Latin American talent, right? So it would be a little off to have our sales team in the US. But to be completely transparent, we hired our first US-based AE out of Kansas. Uh, so I'm very interested to see, uh, how this impacts our culture and the way we do things. So our team right now is both Latin America and US based.
Yeah, and I'm just curious because when you told me about the guy who said, "I'll fire anybody who even brings me this idea,"
Hmm.
sounds like a really nice guy. But was he kind of an old guy in an old industry, if you will, quote unquote, an old industry where they're just not used to doing this? Because that seems crazy. I'm just always in the tech industry, and I don't have a lot of experience in other industries, but if I heard that, I would think this sort of older guy who, is maybe concerned about losing control or, doesn't want to do Zoom
Mhm.
meetings. They want to just be in the office and be with their team all day. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it's a lot of that. And actually, so not necessarily an old guy, not necessarily, but there's this go back to office movement
Yeah.
that is happening in a lot of companies, and specifically a lot of managers and executives, they prefer to be in office. And I think part of it might be control. Some managers, they prefer to see their teams there to make sure they are um, getting work done, or sitting in the chair. I don't know what it is, because it's hard to actually know what people are doing. Um, but in other cases, I think it's especially when you're just trying to get a product off the ground at the very early days of a startup before product market fit. I think there's a lot of value of being in the office, right? And even for us, we've been working remotely for eight years, and sometimes it's tough. We need to get together every now and then just to know that we're people and that we're here and that we can trust each other. It's really hard to build. It's really hard to build a culture remotely, a strong culture. Working remotely definitely comes with challenges. So I don't blame this guy that said, I want an in-office team and I would never consider hiring remotely. It's probably not for him, and it's probably not for the company at this stage they're at right now. Um, yeah, so
It's
that's how
interesting.
I
I
think
mean, I
about it.
think everybody's grappling with this new world that we live in and trying to figure out what's the best, model because both the remote and in office have so many advantages and it's unique to everybody's situation what works best for their company.
Mhm.
And I just as a side note, I think with engineers, you can give them a project, right? And it's like, you have until the end of the month to deliver this project, whatever it is. And, and you can trust them, to work at home and they either deliver it or they don't. And it's
Mhm.
like, it's a cut and dry 1 or 0 situation. I think it's harder with salespeople because, you get to the end of the month and you didn't sell anything and there's
Mhm.
no pipeline. What have you been doing for the last month? If you haven't been, I can't sit there behind you and watch you
Mhm.
on your computer making phone calls and sending emails. So
Mhm.
what have you been doing? So I think that's something that definitely managers are grappling with. In
Mhm.
if they're non-engineers, if you're a marketing coordinator, and you don't have specific projects, you're just supporting people, how do you know what they're doing all day?
Yeah. Uh, I think the big question is, do you need to know what they're doing all day? Do you care about what they're doing all day, right?
Mm.
I personally don't. I want to see results, of course, right?
Yeah.
But I think for engineers and for sales specifically, uh, it's pretty straightforward to manage a remote team, because you have data, you have metrics, you have routines, you have processes, right? Like, think about the way you manage a sales team. What's important for managing a sales team? It's the rituals, right? And the metrics and the number of calls they make, the number of emails they send, the level of personalization they use, the number of connections on LinkedIn. That's what you care about, right? And all of that you can track with any tool out there. There are so many, right? You know them all. Um, so it's pretty straightforward
Brian.
to Sorry, it's really straightforward to manage the team that way, right? You keep an eye on those, and then you analyze, you go deeper when you see issues, and then you have your daily or your weekly or your bi-weekly calls where you motivate them and you over pipeline and things like that. I don't think you need to be in the office. I think what you miss when you're going back one step, the sales team, especially if it's an in-person sales team, they haven't been in the office for a really long time, right?
Yeah.
They've been distributed all over the place to be able to be in front of clients, right? But I think that when it comes to SDRs, I think what we're missing and we still need to figure out is how you have in the SDR room, there's typically a lot of energy, right? That you don't have when you're working from home. So I can imagine it's really lonely to be, working from home and making phone calls and, where's the motivation, where's the drive coming from? So I think that's the challenge.
Big
When it
time.
comes to engineers, it's the same. They have their own routines, their daily stand-up meetings, and their weekly sprint planning or bi-weekly sprint planning, and all of I mean, there are different methodologies, right? But ultimately, you have your methodology, and it doesn't matter whether you are in office or working remotely. Um, yeah, and actually, the whole idea of building Nexton, and the idea that engineers were going to work remotely came from a time where actually I was running my first startup, and we had an office, and there was one engineer sitting to my left and one designer sitting to my right, and they were chatting with each other. And of course, at first I thought they were criticizing me, right? Because why would they be like chatting on Google Chat with each
Yeah.
other? But they were not. They were getting work done, right? So then the question is, why do they need to be in the same office if they're not talking, right? They're just looking at their screens. Um,
Exactly.
so
They probably prefer to be home where they can still get the work done, but there's nobody
mm,
bothering them all the time, you know, and making them come to the office birthday party and eat cake and stuff like that. They're just like, leave me alone. I just want to get this done. And, the other flip side is you remember when you lived here, for a while, I worked, I live in San Francisco, the city, and I worked down in Mountain View. Okay, and it's a nice drive, but
yeah,
it's very long. I mean, and
mhm,
I just remember I sometimes had to start slapping myself on the way home because I was like
mm,
falling asleep. And I do not miss
mm,
commuting, especially when you have to sit in traffic all day to get to the office, and by the time you get there, you're exhausted. And I think that's one of the many reasons people it would be hard to get them to come back to the office, because they're just like, I don't want to commute. I don't want to spend $20 on a sandwich every day, and stuff like that. So it's an interesting mix that we're in right now, this evolving landscape of work. Um, but
yeah, and
yeah,
I would say, especially for engineers, that for the most part, and again, it really depends on the stage of the company and the management style. But for the most part, they don't need to be in office. We're actually recruiting for one of our clients in Mexico, and people from the Bay Area complain a lot about traffic, and I think you have no idea. Traffic in America in some cities like Mexico City or Sao Paulo or even Buenos Aires, that is traffic.
yeah.
Um, we're recruiting for this client in Mexico City, and they want an in-office team, which is very rare because typically at Nexton we work with companies that are building distributed teams, as I mentioned earlier. But this one company, they want an office for now. I think it's going to change pretty quickly. Uh, but people need to live really close to the office to be able to, have a commute that is less than an hour in the morning. Uh, so it's like 2 hours of waste every day, or say 3 times a week, right? It's still a long time.
Yeah.
Um, so it's been really tough to find the right talent for them because most people don't want to go through that. And the reality is they have alternatives, they have options. They don't have to choose a company that is going to make them to go to the office. So this is still a
Wow.
very competitive talent market, right? So so yeah, definitely people are avoiding commuting and going to the office every day. And even companies that make them go like 3 or 2 times a week, they're struggling to find the right talent. They're definitely not hiring the best.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, from the employer perspective, if you want to hire the best, you almost have to offer remote opportunities and not force people to sit in traffic for 2 hours a day.
Yeah, from a definition perspective, right? If you want the best, then you need to loosen all of the restrictions, right? So one of the restrictions, maybe you want to offer them an office, but it has to be optional.
Mm,
Um, but then, of course, if you force people to go to the office, then you're only hiring from a very small
mm.
um, market, right? A very small region, geographical region.
That seems crazy these days. Okay. Totally makes sense. All right. So I'm going to just switch gears a little bit, and you don't have to answer this, but I think your president, I saw him on a video like with a chainsaw, like running around with a chainsaw and ripping down all the different committees, that were bloating the government. What are your thoughts on this guy, and how's it going so far?
Oof, that's a really interesting question. I have to say, I'm very, very hopeful.
Okay.
And the good news is that people are still very hopeful, but they're becoming a little bit impatient, right? Like if you look at our economy, we're struggling. There's a lot of inflation. People are making less. Uh, they're being able to afford less goods. So ultimately, we are in a very deep recession that I think is going to last for a long time.
Oh boy.
Um, but people are hopeful and patient. And this guy, Milei, he has a lot of courage. And he's doing a lot of things that, in my opinion, this is pure opinion. Of course, a lot of people are not going to agree. But in my opinion, that he's doing the right things. Uh, the problem is he doesn't have a lot of support from the House. So he's really walking a really thin line where people are hopeful and patient for now, and he doesn't have a lot of support. So he needs to make sure he gets to the end of the tunnel, the end of the line, and he's able to have some impact and basically pass some laws and policy. Um, but the general feeling is that feeling of hope. Um, yeah.
But he doesn't have
No,
much time. He's on a tightrope, and the honeymoon is wearing off. So,
yeah, and he had two general strikes already.
oh boy.
So he's definitely very charismatic, and that helps.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, what's keeping the people together and patient. We were coming from a really rough place, and I think the alternative would have been horrible, like slow death, in my opinion. So I think this was the only option where it's going to be hard, but there's a chance. So
Yeah.
that's my read, and that's what most people read in this guy, and that's why he got elected, right? We know there's something at the end of the tunnel. We may not make it to the end of the tunnel, and we're right there in the tunnel. It's not
Oh boy.
it's not fun and it's not easy.
Yeah. It's like if you've been sitting on the couch for, 3 years and suddenly you have to exercise every day and eat vegetables all day. It's not very fun. But
Especially at the beginning, right? At the beginning,
yeah,
you're suffering,
why
you're
am I
in
doing
pain,
this?
you know what you need to do, but you don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So
It's
we're
so
we're
hard.
we're we're
Imagine
right there. And
an entire country, right? So,
exactly. And I talk to a lot of people, and they're still patient and hopeful. I honestly, for some social groups, I don't know how they're managing it. I'm surprised we're still in the honeymoon because there's a lot of struggle. And speaking about a tight rope, the rope was pretty tight already. So
mm,
making it tighter, a crisis in Argentina is really like people don't have food,
mm,
right? It's not a crisis in the US. It's not the kind of recession you're talking about in the US where you may not be able to buy a yacht. I know I'm exaggerating a little bit, but
darn it,
but it's a
not
different kind
exaggerating.
of struggle.
I hear you. Yeah, it's a completely different situation. But I'm bullish. I think you're gonna make it. And I think that you've positioned your company for big success, no matter what happens. You know, as an entrepreneur, you kind of have to think about the macro environment, but then it's like, okay, I got to go back to my email and work on microscopic things all day. And I think you're doing a great job. So I'm excited to see
Yeah,
how it goes. Yeah,
and ultimately we're really not in the business of squeezing talent and finding cheap labor.
yeah,
We are in the business of finding great talent and making sure they have access to the best opportunities available for them.
yeah.
The fact that uh, talent is cheaper in Latin America than in the US is just a side note. The talent that works with Nexton, they still make about 2x what they would make working for a local company. In most cases, right? Like on average, in some cases it might be more, in some cases it might be less. But we're talking about the cream of the crop for the talent, the best talent, the ones that think about the requirements to be part of this company. They need to speak almost perfect English. They need to be able to work remote with the discipline it takes, and they need to be senior in what they do, right? Um, so if they are there, they can work with us, and we can help them get the right opportunities for them where they're going to learn so much and develop themselves and be a leader in their community at the end
Oh,
of the
that's
day.
amazing. And you're like the Stanford, business school versus no offense, but San Francisco State, right? That's a big difference. So if is it just engineering or do you have other practices?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we started with engineers, and still the main type of role we help with is engineers.
Okay.
Um, and technical recruiting, so engineering recruiting, it's a little different from hiring any other roles, hiring for any other roles. In particular, the supply demand curve. So lately at least there's been more demand from companies than supply of talent. So the approach you need to take to recruiting is different, right? It's more challenging. But recently, and especially because our clients they want to hire remotely for more roles, we have been expanding beyond technical recruiting, and in some cases, we're helping companies hire marketing ops analysts or SDRs or finance people, accounting people. It's a little bit it's a lot broader than engineering right now. And in order to make it happen, we have actually two separate teams. We have one team doing technical recruiting and a different team doing non-technical recruiting. Um, because again, it's a little bit different how you go about the sourcing the talent, the pitching the talent, the interviewing, evaluating the skills, and so on.
Of course. Okay, great. So you're responding to what the market is asking for and developing that in a way where this isn't just a going to Fiverr and finding somebody for $5 an hour. This is a very elite, team and they can really deliver on the results.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and I agree with that. And you have to be flexible in order to be successful, right?
Yeah.
So I think along those lines, we focus on mainly three things to deliver the value that our clients need, right? Like one I explained earlier is the quality of the work we do, the quality of the process, the quality of the experience, the quality of the talent. The second one is flexibility, indeed. So we listen to our clients, and if they need something different, we want to be their go-to company, their go-to partner when they think about Latin America, right? So you were asking about non-technical recruiting, but in order to make it work, we had to develop our own, equipment delivery solution, right? You hire someone, now what? They need a computer. Okay, maybe they have one, maybe they don't, right? But they definitely need a computer. If they don't have a computer, we need to make sure that there's a way for the engineers or the talent to get their computers. So we had to be flexible, and we had to build a service for that specific need. Otherwise, it would not have been possible to hire anyone, right? and shipping equipment from the US. Shipping equipment cross border is not easy. So one, quality; two, flexibility, and the third one is the relationships, right? You like we spend a lot of time building those relationships, those trust relationships, because that's really what makes us successful, right? Our clients are successful, we are successful.
Yes. That's so interesting. So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to go about that?
Oh, they can follow me on LinkedIn,
Okay.
Twitter, X, right? I should say, or
X.
they can send me an email at Diego at nexton.dev, nexton.dev.
Yeah, and I don't think we're connected on LinkedIn, so I'll send you a connection request after this. But Diego, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom. I really appreciate it, and all the best with you with next time.
Thank you, David. All the best with your projects. It was a very interesting conversation. I appreciate it.